February 29th is a day that comes only once every 4 years. And in 1968, this is the day that I was born. As a kid, I thought it was really unique to have such an unusual birthday. But it was as I got older that I realized that what was more special is the year, 1968. 1968 was a year of tremendous change in our country, and it was a year of big changes for my family, and a year that I think influenced who I am today. In 1968, Dr. Martin Luther King was assassinated for fighting for racial and social equality for African Americans. Cesar Chavez held a 25-day hunger strike, a fast, that he used to protest the growing use of violence in his own farm worker movement. And in 1968, 2 black athletes raised their fists in silent protest at the Olympics in Mexico City. The same city where just 10 days earlier, dozens of students had been massacred in Tlatelolco, massacred for standing up to the political regime and for trying to fight for education and justice and jobs. So in 1968, a lot was happening. In our country, we finally passed the Civil Rights Act, which really was a turning point for the US. And back home in Chicago, I was born. I came into the world and I changed my parents' lives. And I know that all babies do that because I have 2 wonderful daughters, and they certainly have changed my life and my husband's. But in that year, immigration laws were such that my parents, because of my birth, were able to become legal permanent residents. I was the baby that really opened the possibility for them to lay down roots in this foreign and sometimes frozen city of opportunity, even though their hearts really remained in Morelia, Michoacán, Mexico. And as the oldest of 3 daughters, I became the first. I was la mayor, la primogénita, the first to go to school, to leave the familiarity and the safety of my home, to go to a place where nobody spoke Spanish, and where the kids ate peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, which to me was weird. It felt more like a merienda than a lunch. When my parents went to our local Catholic school to enroll me, the principal, Sister Mary Jo, rejected my enrollment. She saw a small, brown, very shy, quiet girl who did not speak English, and she told my parents that she didn't think they could help us. But my parents insisted because coming from Mexico, to them, a Catholic education was the best thing that they can give us. And so I was enrolled, but within the first few weeks, maybe even months, Sister Mary Jo was right, because I sat in a classroom yearning to read the same books that the kids in my class had and to do the same math that they were doing, but I was given puzzles and coloring worksheets. And I sat there very frustrated that I couldn't express myself and tell my teacher that I wanted to learn more and that I could learn more. One day, 2 nuns came to our house. My parents, were surprised. They came with a special request. And although my parents highly respected the religious sisters, they ended up declining their request because what they wanted was for us to speak only English at home. And my parents did the reverse. They always insisted that we speak Spanish. And in fact, my mother taught us to read and write with workbooks that she brought back from our visits to Morelia. They knew what we don't know now, or actually they didn't know the neuroscience research that we have today that shows that the bilingual brain is better, that bilinguals actually have greater cognitive skills and greater ability to interact with people who are different from them. But what they did know is that by sharing their language with us, they were going to pass on their family stories, their culture, their traditions, their values, and ultimately that they were going to ground us, my sisters and I, in our Mexican identity, and that would serve us throughout our lives. So knowing where I came from, knowing that I am a Mexicana, that I am the descendant of a Purépecha princess and a Spanish explorer, that's what we were told, and that my amazing maternal grandmother had 14 children in her home without the use of painkillers, that I have roots in Perivan and in Lagunillas and in Chicago, has really given me the confidence to be open to other people, to new ideas, and to new communities. And for that, I'm eternally grateful to my parents. In high school, I discovered something new about my identity. I read the Communist Manifesto for a senior English class. And it was really an awakening. It taught me many things about inequality and class that I wasn't really aware of. But growing up the daughter of a steelworker, I saw my dad put on a blue uniform with his name that my mom made sure was always cleaned and ironed, even though he was going off to do very dirty, hard work. But he wore this uniform. He worked at a steel mill. It was a 24-hour company. And so every 2 weeks, workers had to change shifts. My dad would leave to work either at 7 in the morning, 3 in the afternoon, or 11 o'clock at night. Every 2 weeks, there was a change. I saw the toll that that took on my father and on our family at times. I also saw that my father was a proud union member. The Steelworkers Union made sure that these workers, although they did really hard, dirty labor, that they had vacation and paid sick time, that we had health insurance, that they had safety equipment and training, and that they had pretty good wages. So when I read the Communist Manifesto, I was really inspired by the idea that workers had rights and that workers should have more power. And in a really ironic way, it reminded me of my Catholic values, that we should treat each other the way we want to be treated, that all people are equal, and that in many ways we all have a role to play in our world and in our society. When I went to college is when I became woke, as my children would say. For those of you who are a little older, you might not know, but woke means that you're socially conscious, you're politically aware, and that you're politicized. You know, I emerged in my college years as a Chicana student advocate, an activist, and a leader. And I became really aware that there were power dynamics in the world. I knew through those college years that what I wanted to do with my life was to be a change maker. I don't know that there was a title, and I know there's no career that is a change maker, but very similar to the other women we've heard today, I just knew that the work that I wanted to do was not investment banking or corporate consulting like many of my classmates, but that is really to make a difference and bring opportunities and resources to communities of color, to the Latino community, and to working people. So I had to find a way to make that happen. Another thing that happened in my college experience, I had the privilege of going to an elite Ivy League university. And while I appreciated everything that I learned to question the status quo, I learned to be a good writer, I learned to be a mediator and a communicator, and I learned to defend my opinions and my perspective using research and facts and data and logic. But I also became very aware of the enormous amount of wealth, privilege, and power that was concentrated in these schools, and that was really available only to a very small number of people. Very small number of students every year get to go into the Ivy League schools, and yet the resources and the access to education that we have is incredible. So I felt like there was something not fair about that, and that the work that I would do would be to expand opportunities like that to other people. Today, I run this group called Generation All. It's a new initiative, and what we're trying to do is to make sure that our neighborhood public high schools in Chicago, the schools that serve the majority of our students, and the majority of our students are Black, brown, immigrant, special needs, and working class, that those schools are able to have the resources that they need to be the best that they can be, because it's their job to serve. Their doors are open. They accept anyone who comes through their doors, and they serve kids of all abilities and all backgrounds. So if we don't make sure that those schools are the best that Chicago has to offer, then we're losing a whole generation of kids. Thinking back to this connection with 1968, I thought, 2016 was a little bit like that year. It was a really kind of a crazy year. We saw young people coming together and rising up to protest unfair laws, abuse of power, and inequality. The Black Lives Matter movement has really taught all of us, and I think challenged us, to question and to address how we perceive and we treat Black males in our country. We saw undocumented immigrants, many of them students, and their allies come together and work really publicly to pass DACA and DAPA, even at their own personal risk. And we also saw young people in Chicago public school students from the selective enrollment schools, from the neighborhood schools, from the charter schools, protesting the need for fair and equitable funding for public education. So I think, this year reminded me of 1968 in this activism that we see among our youth. We also saw in the incredibly, almost ridiculous presidential campaign that we have going on, that there was a growing number of people really being open about what they didn't like the candidates were saying. And that a whole generation, maybe millions of young people, a lot like my two daughters, young feminists, millennials, Latinx women, supported an old Jewish white guy. Yes. And they did that because Bernie Sanders' message was one of unity, of hope, of working for the common good, and of fairness. And really because ultimately, as his campaign often reminded us, love trumps hate at any point. So I think history has taught us that our young adult generation is always a generation that pushes us, that pushes our society to make the changes and do what we need for our world in that moment. So I would say to the young people in this audience, find a way that you can make a difference, be a change maker, and for the rest of us, I think we need to just follow their lead. Thank you.